So hopefully you've got that first slide set up. Great stuff. So basically that's a summary of what we're talking about today. Local council in general, but also around the risk and how does that connect to insurance. So why do I need to do risk assessments and think about my risk, and how would that affect my insurance and my insurance premiums in the future? Just a disclaimer there is basically I'm not a risk management specialist. Gallagher's have a whole team to do that, and some of you may be using health and safety specialist teams around the country that can help you with your health and safety policies and risk assessments. If you're in any doubt or you're not really sure of what you've put in your content, then it's probably worth at least getting quotes from those companies, just to cast an eye over what you've got already and make sure that you haven't missed anything with recent legislation. Hopefully today we'll a reminder of your own practices and what you do currently, and you'll say, oh yeah, I do that already, or you'll think, oh, maybe I should do that, and hopefully reinforce your thinking about risk assessments in general, but how they're recorded, I would say. Today is just a summary of where the risk is, who does it protect, as in a local council policy in general, how to reduce the chance of a claim in the first place through good risk management, what supporting documents will we likely to need to support a claim. And I say Gallagher's, but that would be your insurer. I talk about cybercrime insurance a little bit. Why do I need this? Perhaps the local councils think they have low risk. Well, we'll talk about that a bit. Just a reminder about underinsurance on your buildings in particular. And then if we've got time, we'll do plenty of questions at the end. So basically here we've got who does a council policy protect? On the left-hand side are some of those key policy sections on a policy you would have heard of. And they're basically designed to cover the public, your own employees, volunteers, and councils, so the officials of the council. And obviously the public and employers liability you'll know well. So the public liability, the public in general. The employers liability is everybody that works on behalf of the council. They don't have to be a PAYE employee. They could still claim under that cover if they were just an official or a volunteer acting under your control. Hirer's indemnity, if you're hiring out buildings, there is an extension for that connects to the public liability. Officials' indemnity is protecting the councillors. So people are trying to do the good thing for their community. They don't want to lose their house in the event of a claim against them as an individual. So that sort of protection. Key person sort of can get protection for the key member of staff if they're away. So perhaps pay some money towards a local clerk. Personal accident is group personal accident. So that covers everybody that's working on behalf of the council. So it could be a litter pick that you've got volunteers all coming in to help with. If somebody's has an accident, but it's nobody's fault, so it's not an employer's liability claim, then the personal accident section may help in mitigating and passing on some payments to that individual. And then the sort of basics, libel and slander. Cyber cover is now a separate insurance. You'll see it mentioned in a lot of policies as an exclusion because insurers have now made it clear that it's not designed to be covered in a package policy. It's now become too specialized. We talk about protecting good people. So the risk is the key, but there's risk to your finances, or risk to your property that you own. That's your assets and buildings. To your own staff and volunteers who are trying to help the council. The risk with the events in general, you all probably had some involvement in events however big or small, and you know the hoops you have to jump through for some of those. So the risk around those, the risk of legal claims against you, and then we talk about sort of the inspections. What are you doing to inspect? How are you writing those down, making sure they're passed on to everybody, and then the council makes decisions about how to deal with those risks. With regard to claims, this is just a general summary of what insurers would be talking about and looking at. Basically, the key thing is the onus is on the claimant to prove negligence. So we all hear about councils having claims against them for, you know, I fell over in your car park, I'm going to make a claim against you. So they've got to prove negligence. They've got to see you were at fault. So insurers will be looking for you to help them repudiate claims. So they will generally ask questions. They may send somebody out to investigate a serious public liability claim, for example. And they'll ask you questions about, well, do you think you're at fault? What have you got to document how you protected that risk? So in this case, you know, that they're looking for risk assessments, because if there aren't any in place at all that covers the area we're talking about, they may be just forced to come to an agreed settlement with the third party. And that's because they know that if it went to court, if it went that far, the judge would effectively just say, well, you have no way of documenting that you considered the risk. In that case, you must be negligent, so you're at fault. In that case, insurers will be looking at repetitive claims of the same nature. That's when they're reviewing your insurance in general and the premiums at renewal. Usually, they say, right, hang on, you've got a series of claims for the same type of thing. So everybody keeps falling over in the same spot, or you've got an issue with that area on that recreation ground, for example, or that building. Repetitive claims. So you may find that if you don't deal with those, that they'll end up imposing terms, or perhaps increasing premiums or higher excesses, that sort of thing. They want to know what actions have been taken to prevent similar claims arising. So they say, okay, we've had several claims of the same type. It could be sort of malicious damage, you know, and sometimes you can't do anything about it. But they will say, okay, well, now we put in security lighting, we've got CCTV, or other ways to try and prevent a claim against you. What is a risk assessment? You'll know what they are generally. I mean, this is a term that was taken from one of our risk management team, but a systematic process of evaluating the potential risks that may be involved in an activity or undertaking. It's a long-winded way of saying you've got to identify the hazards, decide who might be harmed and how, evaluate those risks and decide on the precautions, record your findings and implement them, and review your assessment and update if necessary. I think that's important. Effectively, I'll just go back to that one. So you've got to keep your risk assessment up to date. So it's no good doing one for each location, signing it and dating it and then putting it in a drawer and forgetting about it. You've got to keep it. It's got to be a working document that you evaluate all the time, especially if there's changes in a particular location. So you add some playground equipment, you make an extension to a building. You've got to keep it updated, because if you try and bring that out as evidence in the event of a claim and it's 2 years old and it's not been reviewed and updated and re-signed, then it'll be difficult to argue that you've continued to evaluate the risk of that location. The hazard here, anything with a potential, this is really about looking after your own, I think. Anything with the potential to cause harm, chemicals, electricity, ladders, workstations, slip hazards, of course. You're looking at the risk. So how great a chance is it that someone will be harmed by that hazard? So, you know, I don't know if anybody has actually been to a site and you started to work out the hazards. You tend to find everything is a potential hazard. So you could put everything down that you could ever think of, but you've got to look at the more realistic ones, I guess, and work out, which ones are the most important. If in doubt, I say put it in. Employers, of course, have a duty to assess the health and safety risks present in the workplace. Obviously, that's for employees, but also that you've got volunteers who are helping. So they're all sort of authorised volunteers of the council. If they come in and they're working under your control, you've got to still consider the risk to them and how you're going to protect it. So all of those things on the list there potentially are there. But things like the organisational risks are fairly new in the excess workload, long hours, working with high need clients, bullying. There are also risks that need to be considered, as well as the physical risks to buildings, etc. Identifying who may be harmed, who is at risk with the council's own full and part-time employees, councillors, and any volunteers. Employers must also assess risks faced by agency and contract staff. So obviously visitors to public buildings, people coming in to repair things. You've got a duty of care to them, of course. Must review your work routines in all the different locations and situations where their staff are employed. So yeah, you may have staff who work outside all the time. So you may need to make sure that where they're working, where they're having their cup of tea, whatever, is also safe. So that also needs to be considered. You're basically looking all the time at how likely is each hazard that you've identified, how likely is it to cause harm? This will determine whether or not you should reduce the level of risk even after the precautions have been taken. So you may come in, you've identified a risk, you've done something to prevent it. So that doesn't mean it's removed completely from the risk assessment. It may mean you just have to keep an eye on it to make sure that the precautions you've taken or the repair you've made is maintained, and it's not nobody's come in and destroyed that repair, for example. Employers must decide for each remaining hazard whether the risk remains high, medium, or low. You've all done these, I'm sure, and there's no hard or easy way to identify that. So you have to do it in the best way you can. You must record your writings and the main findings of the risk assessment. As I said, the record should include details of any hazards noted in the risk assessment and the actions taken. The record provides proof that the assessment was carried out and is used as the basis for a later review of working practices. And just to repeat, that it is a working document, should be able to read it. It should not be locked away in a cupboard. Just a reminder, risks must be kept under review in order to ensure that agreed practices continue to be applied. If circumstances change, then a new risk assessment should be carried out or the existing one updated. The note there says that previous versions of risk assessments and safe systems should be retained and archived with clear version controls. As you see, ideally in PDF format, not Word or Excel, because they think you can change them. And that's the important thing, really, is keep them up to date, because and you need to basically make sure everyone's aware of what's in those risk assessments. So if it talks about working practices, then your people who are working for you, including volunteers, need to know that they should be following those best practices to avoid a loss or injury. So just in insurance summary, reviewing cover, part of your risk assessment should include reviewing your insurance and your asset register. You should have 2 extra columns: insurance replacement costs and whether insured or not. So as you know, you could have something that's is shown as £1, but you need a replacement cost in a column. The policy will be a new for old, so expect it to insure for a new for old value on assets. Replacement costs on assets should be reflected within the insurance schedule. So make sure that you do a tally of the asset register and compare it to your insurance policy to make sure you're adding up correctly. And review that at least once a year. 80% of those clients we visit require some kind of adjustment. I'll skirt over this quickly. Buildings reinsurance valuations. If you haven't had one done in the last few years, please look into getting one done. There are companies, we've got a link to one who will do desktop valuations. It's a fraction of the cost of somebody coming on site, £140 plus VAT, I think the current rate. As long as it's straightforward building, not listed, not unusual. But make sure you've got one up to date, because with what's been going on in the market, you will find that a lot of those buildings are underinsured now. Sorry, I went slightly over, but thank you for listening today.